Howdy, and welcome to Blood Vessels 1. These next slides will be concerned with looking at the arteries specifically. So if you look at the cartoon bottom left, you see the heart with the aorta and the aortic arch, and coming off the aortic arch are 3 blood vessels. And then just to the right of the aorta is the pulmonary trunk. To the left of the aorta is the superior and inferior vena cava. And then you can also see the pulmonary veins, the 4 red tubes bringing blood back from the lungs to the heart. And you can see that they've done a section through the aorta, the abdominal aorta. So if you look just below the heart, you can see the aorta. There's a cut through there. And then they section that out and show you a model of a large artery. So remember, there's the lumen, which is just the space inside the blood vessel, and then there's the next layer, more superficial to the lumen, is the tunica intima with its endothelium and basement membrane. And then there's a sort of a real loose areolar connective tissue made of collagen. Then more superficial to the intima is the media, where vascular smooth muscle cells live. And also there's some fibroblasts in the tunica media, making some collagen and elastin within the tunica media. And then there's the tunica externa. And in large arteries, tunica externa, of course, has the vasa vasorum. That means its own blood vessel supply, because oxygen and glucose can't diffuse from the lumen all the way out to the tunica externa, where fibroblast cells live. Those fibroblasts, of course, make collagen and elastin in the tunica externa. Large arteries, because they take blood from the heart to large areas of the body, they're called conducting arteries, so they conduct blood from the heart to major areas of the body. And then, of course, the large arteries will morph into medium and then small arteries. So the conducting arteries, aka the large arteries, include the aorta, which we just looked at, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary arteries, the common carotid arteries. So those are arteries that come off that aortic arch. In the large arteries, there's a lot of elastic tissue. So in addition to the large arteries being called the conducting arteries, they're also called the elastic arteries, because there's a lot of elastic in them. There's also a lot of collagen and vascular smooth muscle cells. The elastin, collagen, and vascular smooth muscle cells are mostly in the tunica media. So, like I said, because they're the arteries, the large arteries especially, deal with that huge pulse of blood coming out of the ventricle, they need to be elastic so they can expand and then recoil. So the blood vessel wall of the large elastic conducting arteries will dampen that pulse of blood coming out of the ventricle by expanding. When the blood vessels do that, when the large arteries do that, they're storing energy as potential energy. And then when that pulse passes through the large arteries, then those large arteries will recoil. So they'll change the they'll change the potential energy into kinetic energy when they recoil. And when they recoil, that allows them to continually send a steady flow of blood downstream to smaller arteries. So if the large arteries were rigid tubes that couldn't expand and recoil, then you'd have a pulse of blood just run through and go to the capillary bed and probably break the capillary bed down, because it'd be such a large amount of energy arriving at one time. But because the large arteries can expand and then recoil, they can send a nice steady flow of blood downstream. So then the next smaller size from the large conducting elastic arteries are the medium arteries. In this cartoon, it shows in the medium-sized artery that you have the three tunics, the intima, the media, and also it has the, doesn't show on this cartoon, it looks like it cut off, but there's also a tunica adventitia or outer layer. But what the medium-sized arteries have that other arteries don't are these structures called the internal and external elastic lamina. And just like its name, they're made of elastic tissue. And in this cartoon, it's the purple, kind of looks like Swiss cheese. Those are the lamina. So because medium arteries carry blood to specific organs, or they distribute blood to specific organs, medium arteries are also called distributing arteries. There's an increased vascular smooth muscle cell percent. So overall, there's more vascular smooth muscle cells in the larger arteries, but as a percent of the types of cells that you could have in the tunica media or in the medium arteries, there's a large percent of vascular smooth muscle cells in those medium arteries. So in the medium arteries, you get some vasomotion. So wherever you see vascular smooth muscle cell, you can get some vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So because there's a lot of vascular smooth muscle cells in the medium arteries are not only called distributing arteries, but they're also called muscular arteries. When the body does a widespread decrease in blood vessel diameter, or mathematically you could also call blood vessel diameter blood vessel radius, if there's a widespread decrease in blood vessel diameter, that you get you get an increase in the mean arterial pressure, aka the blood pressure. And same thing if you have an increase in blood vessel radius, then you'll decrease overall mean arterial pressure, aka blood pressure. Also, if you cut a medium-sized artery, they can do vascular spasm. So those vascular smooth muscle cells can start spasming and close off that cut blood vessel so that you lose less blood. The medium arteries are all the named arteries. So if you check your study guide for the next lab practical exam, you can see in the cartoons all those named arteries that you have to memorize. Those are all medium arteries. So for example, you have the brachial artery, the radial artery, the femoral artery. All of those are named, all the medium arteries are named arteries. And then as you get smaller and smaller, so we've gone from large to medium, you go to a small artery, and then you go into an arteriole. So this cartoon of an arteriole, you can see that you've got a tunica intima with the endothelium and basement membrane. You have a thinner tunica media and thinner tunica externa. And the arterioles are also called the resistance vessels because that's where most of the vasomotion that controls your blood pressure occurs. Arterioles will carry blood to specific capillary beds, but arterioles and capillary beds don't have names like the medium-sized arteries do. Relatively speaking, there's a lot of vascular smooth muscle cells at the level of the arteriole because I told you that's where most of the regulation of blood flow into an organ is done, is at the level of the arteriole. And I also told you because of this vascular smooth muscle cell phenomenon where they can vasoconstrict or vasorelax. So when they're vasoconstricting, they're offering a lot of resistance throughout the vascular tree. So that's why the arterioles are also called the resistance arteries. And then from the arteriole, you go into a medarteriole, and then from a medarteriole, you can flow into a capillary bed. So if you look on the left side of this cartoon, it shows a capillary bed. You can see an arteriole. When the arteriole turns to go into a capillary bed, it becomes a medarteriole for a short while. And then the medarterioles link or allow blood flow from the arterioles into the capillaries. Medarterials have precapillary sphincters, that's the structure, but the cell type that makes up the precapillary sphincter is a vascular smooth muscle cell. And those vascular smooth muscle cells obviously can vasoconstrict and vasorelax to regulate blood flow to specific capillary beds depending on the need. So if you just ate a big meal and you're sitting down, you probably are doing a lot of vasodilation at your arterioles and your precapillary sphincters in blood vessels that supply your GI tract.